So anyway, uh, do we want to get into um
Our rankings.
our rankings?
Let's do it.
What do you got for your number 10 starting pitcher for 2024?
Yeah, so I had so many close misses. I think I had like 16 pitchers or so on my big board, and I had to pick six that didn't make it, which was very difficult. I'll go through some of those after we make our list. But at number 10, I have a guy that I think a lot of people might have forgotten about in the last year because he spent a lot of time on the injured list. And with how many good starting pitchers there are, it's pretty easy to forget about certain guys when they're not on the field very much. Like for only 77 and two-thirds innings in a year. But I'm taking Max Fried as my number 10 pitcher in baseball going into 2024. Even in those 77 innings that he pitched last year, Max Fried was kind of amazing. He had a 2.55 ERA. Um, and if you look at his pitch arsenal, he very impressively has a four-seam fastball as his primary pitch, and yet again has a 59.2% ground ball rate and only an 18% fly ball rate. Like I mentioned earlier, four-seam fastballs are meant to rise, and because of that, it's meant for hitters to get under them, hit them in the air, probably hit a lot of home runs. And Max Fried did a really good job of preventing that. In terms of his four most used pitches, his highest launch angle was 8 degrees. Um, he also had a 5.8% walk rate last year. He had an 86.5% average exit velocity, and he's also had amazing exit velocity numbers every year since 2020. He's always had solid ground ball rates. He only had a 23% sweet spot rate against last year and a 2.75 expected ERA. I probably would have put him higher on this list if he pitched more last year. And unfortunately, injuries kind of just got to him very early in the season. They stuck with him all the way through. But I think Max Fried is still the really, really great pitcher that he was going into 2023. And I'm going to keep him there going into 2024.
Yeah. I'm trying to pull up the MLB Network list just for comparison because they
Yep.
have they have released those. I know he was off of Mike Petriello's personal list. He was in the just missed category, and yeah, starting pitcher. I think it goes back a little bit. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Trying to find here. No, catcher. He was number nine
They
on
did starting pitcher. Yeah.
yeah, he was number 9 on MLB Network's list. Um, for my number 10, I am going with uh the ground god,
Ah,
Framber Valdez. Um, he has an interesting thing about him. In the last 2 years, he has a 3.13 ERA and 3.28 FIP, which are very, very good. However, I'm kind of alarmed at some of the underlying numbers he had last year. He had an expected ERA in the 42nd percentile due to a rise in average exit velocity, barrel rate, sweet spot percentage, and fly ball rate and line drive rate. Jumps in all of those. And he had a big drop in ground ball rate. He's great at getting ground balls, but he allowed them 12% less, or he allowed them at a rate 12 percentage points below what his rate was in 2022. Could be an outlying season, I will say, and he's still one of the best innings eaters in baseball. So I still consider him definitely a top 10 pitcher. But looking at his expected ERA more than his FIP, there's a little bit more concern to be had there. But considering what his resume was, heading into last year, and how he was still just generally a pretty good pitcher last year, especially run prevention wise and FIP wise, and how many innings he's been able to get the last 2 years. He is still a top 10 pitcher in my mind. What do you have for number 9?
Number 9, I have a guy that was not on MLB Network's top 10 starting pitcher list, was not on Mike Petriello's personal list. I don't even know if he was on Mike Petriello's just missed list. And I wouldn't be surprised if he's not on your list, but I'm really high on him, and I think he's going to have a career year in 2024. And that's Tyler Glasnow, a guy that we talked about recently as he was traded to the Dodgers and extended. He only pitched 120 innings last year, the most he's ever pitched in any season of his career. But he had a 2.91 FIP, the second best in Major League Baseball last year, minimum 100 innings pitched. He has a solid ground ball rate. He has an excellent strikeout rate. He is a 96th percentile whiff rate at 35.3%. Really, the only thing is that he does get touched up a little bit. Average exit velocity was up. Barrel rate and hard hit rate were up last year. But, I still think that there's so much potential in that arm in a full season. I think he's capable of being a top 5 pitcher in a full season. In fact, last year, his ground ball rate went from 35% in 2022, and actually I should use 2021 because he pitched more, 45% in 2021 to 50.9% in 2023. If he can keep that up while also having the amazing strikeout to walk numbers he has and the strikeout volume that he has, Tyler Glasnow is without any sort of doubt a top 10 pitcher in the league in my book, and I have him at number 9. I'm really betting on a big season for him going into 2024.
Yeah, yeah. Getting away from the Rays, who have
That I'm telling you, that is going to make him better automatically. Like I can't, there's no actual statistical data to back up why it's better to be not on the Rays, but I mean, look at what happens to their pitchers. It happened to Tyler Glasnow. He had Tommy John surgery already. Ideally he won't need it again. Of course, it's not necessarily the most uncommon thing for guys to have it twice, but I'm gonna go ahead and run under the assumption that he's not right now.
Right, right. And what we mean by the Rays of poorly affecting pitchers is health mostly. They actually, they usually improve pitchers' performance, but at the sacrifice of their health for whatever reason. Whereas the Dodgers, I don't think they really have that reputation. So yeah, I mean, if he puts together a qualifying season, that's a guy who I think I would predict would get Cy Young votes. Not even say he has the potential to have them. I think if he gets a full season under his belt, that's the guy who's getting Cy Young votes. My number 9, if Google Chrome starts working, this is a guy who I don't think he was on MLB Network's list. I don't think he was on Mike Petriello's list or his Just Missed list, but he's a guy who I think because people are always sort of projecting him to regress considering age or just pitching style, he's not going to get the recognition for projecting him for 2024. But I got Sonny Gray as my number 9, just because
he was on MLB Network's list.
Oh, he was on MLB.
He's number 10. Yeah.
Okay, that's very good. So
yeah.
I don't have him far from that in number 9, but just the reputation he's built over the past 1.5 seasons. It's pretty remarkable, actually. Out of 64 pitchers with 200 plus innings since the start of the second half in 2022, Sonny Gray ranks 2nd in ERA and 3rd in FIP. Now I'm not going to come out here and say, oh, he's going to be a top 3 pitcher because of these numbers, but I think he does deserve some recognition as a top 10 pitcher. He's probably due for a little bit of regression in the home run allowance. I think he had 13.5 expected home runs allowed as opposed to 10 actual home runs allowed. And going from Target Field to Busch Stadium, I think will probably negatively affect him a little bit. But he still has a quality strikeout minus walk rate, still a quality ground ball rate last year. That makes him a very good pitcher. And, although he's been around for a while, he's still not old. He's heading into his age 34 season here. So, and especially for a starting pitcher, that's not a big deal. So yeah, I still predict some quality pitching from Sonny Gray. I don't think he'll be, a Cy Young runner-up once again, but I could see him getting Cy Young votes. I could still see him being a pretty quality pitcher for the Cardinals. And that's why I was pretty excited about that signing for them. What do you have for your number 8?
So for my number 8, I have another the ground god, not the ground god, the ground like Messiah or something like that. Would that be a step down from God?
Yeah.
The ground Messiah. I'm gonna go with Logan Webb, who's been an excellent ground ball pitcher and also just an excellent pitcher in general since the start of 2021. If you've listened to this show for a while, you know that I love Logan Webb. The thing that I find so interesting about him is that he's changed up the way that he succeeds in the last couple of years. In 2021, the first season where he really broke out, he was a sinker baller that got a lot of ground balls and also, had good strikeout numbers, good walk numbers, and, didn't allow a lot of fly balls. In 2023, he threw a grand total of 1,324 changeups. He threw his sinker about 300 times less, 250 times less. And he's got a lot of ground balls, out of his changeup. He does something that a lot of right-handed pitchers are scared to do, and that's throw a changeup to right-handers, because changeups from out of the right-handed arm slot are supposed to move out towards left-handers and in towards right-handers. It's easier to hit generally if you're a right-hander. Logan Webb threw more changeups to right-handers than any other pitcher in baseball last year, and he got a 35% ground ball rate out of right-handers against changeups. That might not sound like a lot. It is a lot. It's actually the highest minimum. I think it was like a certain amount of batted balls against. I think it was like 100 batted balls against changeups against right-handers by right-handed pitchers. I believe that was a stat, but I appreciate that he isn't afraid to go into those waters, and he does very well with them. So that's why I think Logan Webb is my number 8.
Yeah, Logan Webb
There's
just
a lot there's a lot more to it, but that's kind of the special beneath the surface things that I like about him.
just a absolute workhorse the past couple years as well.
216 innings pitched last year.
Yeah, led the league there. Cy Young finalist, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. My number 8 is a guy who obviously made a lot of headway in the news this offseason, but it's Yoshinobu Yamamoto. Some people may have him ranked way higher. Some people may have him off the list because he's technically unproven in the MLB. But it's definitely very, very weird to evaluate pitchers who are coming from other entirely other leagues. But I just wanted to compare him, just comparing him to other Japanese pitchers coming over and how he compares to them. I looked at specifically Kodai Senga. Senga came over last year. He had a 1.89 ERA and 19% strikeout minus walk rate the year before he came here, whereas Yoshinobu Yamamoto had a 1.16 ERA and 22% strikeout minus walk rate, along with lower home run allowance. Kodai Senga, with those numbers coming over from Japan, he ended up having a pretty good year last year. Not a lot of innings, but still finished 7th in the Cy Young and 2nd in Rookie of the Year. I think Yamamoto has the potential to be better in his first year in Japan, maybe even more innings, just better strikeout walk numbers, lower run allowance. So I think he just has that potential. And but still, I still hesitate to have him over some of the elite pitchers in the MLB that have established themselves in the MLB already. So yeah, that's my analysis of Yoshinobu Yamamoto.
Yeah. So moving on to number 7, I have a former Cy Young winner. We haven't quite seen those days come back yet, but that's also a very high bar. I have Corbin Burnes in my number 7 spot. Corbin Burnes is still an ace pitcher, even though he's not quite at his 2021 self. At least he hasn't really shown it since, but he has become a lot more of an innings eater than he was at that point. And he still dominates kind of most aspects of pitching. He still has a very good ground ball rate. He still has elite strikeout rate. He gets very good weak contact against him, only an 86.4% average exit velocity against last season. His strikeout to walk numbers, like I mentioned, still very strong. And his cutter has continued to be one of the elite pitches in baseball. He has he gets a 22% whiff rate off it. That's what he got last year, a 22% put away percent as well. And he just is continued to dominate all aspects of pitching. Like I mentioned, only a 31% sweet spot rate last year as well. The home run ball is a little bit more of an issue for him now than it used to be. But I think that it's kind of almost just something that comes with more innings. This is kind of how I feel about it. But regardless, Corbin Burnes is my number 7.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I don't really know what to expect at a Corbin Burnes this year. He could go back to 2021 form, or he could continue to be a worse pitcher. I wouldn't be surprised either way. With my number 7, I am going with the Cy Young finalist from last year, Zach Gallen. He had a 3.47 ERA and 3.26 FIP last year. But he is a guy I would describe as and I just came up with this term, a FIP merchant, because his FIP was much lower than his expected ERA. And what that kind of analyzes is, expected ERA keeps track of the batted ball data. FIP does not. I think, and FIP mostly relies on home runs for, the batted ball stuff. Whereas expected ERA, it accounts for the fact that he had a pretty unfortunate sweet spot rate against and line drive rate against, along with a very high average exit velocity against. Zach Gallen allowed a third percentile average exit velocity, a fifth percentile hard hit rate against, 27th percentile barrel rate against, 27% line drive rate. But ultimately, he's still a top 10 pitcher. I'm not, completely dogging on him here. He has a 20% strikeout minus walk rate over the past 2 years in 394 innings in those last 2 years. So I think he's still definitely a top 10 pitcher, but I'm not hopping aboard him as a top 5 pitcher based off of his, FIP numbers the past couple of years. Who do you have for your number 6?
So in my number 6 spot, I think this is really where the hot takes start coming out. This guy was on Mike Petriello's list. He was not on MLB's list. I can't imagine he was anywhere close, to be honest. But at my number 6, I'm going with Pablo Lopez from the Minnesota Twins. I think Pablo Lopez is maybe the most underrated pitcher in all of baseball. He definitely showed it last year. He kind of got outshined for a lot of the season in the trade that he was a part of, with Luis Arias threatening to hit 400 until June. But Pablo Lopez had an elite season, especially from June on. In overall last year, 10.86 strikeouts per 9, only 2.23 walks per 9. That's actually his career lowest since 2019. Home run rate was up quite a bit, or not up quite a bit, but it was relatively high. But I think that's largely due to the fact that he had his expected home runs were a lot lower, 19.8 19.8 expected home runs as opposed to 24 actual home runs allowed. But also the fact that he just throws his four-seam fastball a lot, it's naturally going to produce a lot of fly balls. But what it doesn't naturally produce is a lot of swings and misses. But that's what he does, a 31.5% whiff rate against his four-seam fastball last year as his primary pitch. His expected numbers on that pitch were a lot better than his actual numbers. Bit of misfortune not going his way last year that kind of kept him from, I think, being a lot more recognized for the pitcher that he is. And going into his secondary pitches, he has a sweeper that has a 36.6% whiff rate last year. A very, very impressive pitch, a 173 batting average against, just a 287 slugging against. And also an 81.3% average exit velocity against in 94 batted balls. So, it's a solid secondary pitch, maybe one of the best secondary pitches in all of baseball. His changeup right there with it. He dominated the playoffs last year. If you look at his Savant page, he's literally good at everything. Like everything is at least some shade of red. I think the lowest percentile he's at is at 64% fastball velocity. But even then, he has 96 percentile extension. So he gets a lot more perceived velocity on that fastball. Pablo Lopez is at my 6, which is it a hot take? Maybe. But I kind of stand by it, and I would not be shocked if he performs like a top 6 pitcher this coming season.
Yeah, well, especially considering, what he did last year. I think
in the playoffs.
It's a fair assessment to go based off of that. I mean, 93rd percentile expected ERA is pretty stellar. My number 6 is Kevin Gausman. I think a lot of people might have him higher, but I also describe him as a bit of a FIP merchant. He has an excellent FIP. I think over the last 2 years it's at 2.68 or something like that. Like, that is crazy good. His ERA, I think, is in the low 3s over the past few years. And that's because, the FIP is because he has fantastic strikeout and walk numbers. He has the second highest strikeout minus walk rate in the last 2 seasons, minimum 300 innings pitched. But he also has some bad batted ball metrics against him. He had a 20th percentile barrel rate last year, 20th percentile hard hit rate last year, and he had a 37% sweet spot rate against, which obviously allows for some more hits to just fall through, more barrels and whatnot. So that prevents him from being a top 5 pitcher for me. But I still think, he's a guy, who will probably put up a low to mid threes ERA, but I don't think the FIP accurately represents him necessarily to make him, a top 3 or top 5 pitcher. Who do you have for your number 5?
And my number 5, you talked about him earlier. This is where I put Yoshinobu Yamamoto. It's very hard to kind of figure out where to put these guys. And I decided to put him at 5. I maybe, definitely a lot bolder than yours. I mean, I think I don't know. It's hard to say what the wrong answer is with how to evaluate Yamamoto right now. I'm loading up his baseball reference page because his fan graphs is not loading right now. But I mean, he won the Japanese equivalent of the Cy Young in the last 3 seasons over in Japan. I mean, this is the most hype we've seen for a Japanese import since Shohei Ohtani. And I mean, I think you got to remember what that hype was like for Ohtani back in 2017. I know this is all anecdotal, but it was impossible for him to live up to it, and he has. And Yamamoto, I think the way that they're hyping him up, they're talking about him like he's a top 5 pitcher in baseball. And I mean, if you look at the stats, they all show it. I mean, a 1.16 ERA last year in Japan in 171 innings pitched, 6.29 strikeouts per walk. My favorite, I mean, 2 home runs allowed in 171 innings pitched. If that translates proportionally in America, he's going to be, one of the best at preventing home runs in baseball while also being one of the most elite at strikeout to walk ratios. I think, it's hard. Like I said, it is very hard to evaluate a guy that's never thrown a pitch in Major League Baseball, but we have seen him against major league hitters in the World Baseball Classic. And I mean, we saw Japan win the World Baseball Classic last year, and we saw Yoshinobu Yamamoto dominate those hitters. So there's no reason to believe he can't dominate American hitters the same way.
Yeah, for sure. That Yoshinobu Yamamoto is, on this list, like he probably has some of the highest like variance on where people are putting him with,
Yeah.
they could have
If people are putting him at all.
Yeah. They could have him top 3 if they're really, really optimistic about him. And yeah, like if he comes out and wins a Cy Young in his first year, like it might be a little bit surprising, but nothing off the radar necessarily. So my number 5, staying in the NL West, someone you previously talked about, talking about Logan Webb for number 5. A lot of this just has to do with his innings production. He's a true workhorse with the 3rd most innings pitched in the last 2 seasons, and then also just a very, very quality pitcher. 3.09 ERA and 3.10 FIP in the last 2 seasons. Obviously a ground messiah as we're putting him. Out of 67 pitchers with 750 plus batted balls in the last 2 seasons, he is the 2nd highest ground ball rate, 2nd lowest sweet spot rate, and 5th lowest line drive rate out of 67, and also had a 19% strikeout minus walk rate last season, which is 5 percentage points above league average. So great strikeout minus walk numbers while having great sweet spot ground ball line drive numbers, and that's made him an excellent pitcher, having a 3.09 ERA, 3.10 FIP in the last 2 seasons. So yeah, I very, very optimistic about Logan Webb. Obviously, also pretty young, heading into his age 27 season. So I'm liking what I'm seeing out of Logan Webb, and I think he'll continue that heading into 2024. Who do you have as your number 4?
So number 4, I have a guy that you mentioned earlier. I'm talking about Kevin Gausman. You had him at 6, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that really impresses me about Kevin Gausman, and I think the reason why I had him a little bit higher than you did, is that all of his successes have come basically with just 2 pitches. As a starter, as I kind of mentioned earlier with Jordan Hicks, it's very hard to get by as a starter without a very diverse pitch arsenal. And Kevin Gausman in 2023 had his 4-seam fastball and his split finger fastball account for almost 90% of his pitches thrown. He did throw a slider and a sweeper very briefly, but there was, they didn't even get that very good results, and they were about 10% of his total pitch usage. So he kind of gets away with doing something that you're not supposed to get away with. I think there's a lot of, you have to be very talented to have two pitches get you by like that as a starter. And yeah, excellent FIP numbers over the last couple of years, a 2.68 FIP you mentioned, a 2.38 FIP in 2022, which was outstanding. Yeah, one of the best FIP pitchers in all of baseball, even with like volume. He's pitching 180 innings a season right now, maybe even up to 190 at some points as well. And yeah, I mean, the splitter is one of the best pitches in all of baseball. It's very hard to find a guy sort of like that, and I think I put a lot of stock into that. And it almost feels like he could be more talented with a third pitch. It's that's not necessarily the right thing to evaluate, because you don't know if he's getting one or not, and he's also been good without it. But I really am impressed by Kevin Gosman's ability to pitch with such a limited arsenal to that degree of success. So for that reason, I have him at number 4.
Yeah, right. My number 4, I might with this ranking, I might be underrating him, or at least according to a lot of people, but I think he's due for a little bit of regression. However, my number 4 is Garrett Cole. He's, one of his best assets is he's another true workhorse like Logan Webb. He's the second most innings pitched in the last 2 seasons. Along with that, low ERA and FIP numbers in the last 2 years with a 3.05 ERA and a 3.31 FIP. What I'm concerned about with Garrett Cole, and why I think he's due for a little bit of regression, is there was a big drop in whiff rate and strikeout rate last season, despite him, obviously winning the Cy Young. His underlying numbers in some ways got a little bit worse. His whiff rate dropped 8 percentage points, and his strikeout rate dropped 5 percentage points, and his average four-seam velocity dropped 1.1 miles per hour. And, there's a little bit, I think he's heading into his age 32 or 33 season. So age is maybe catching up to him a little bit there, maybe causing him to strike out less guys and throw a little less hard. He also just had some batted ball luck that probably won't carry over. He had the third luckiest difference in slugging and expected slugging, and the second luckiest difference in batting average and expected batting average out of 59 pitchers. So if you're wondering why I have him number 4 instead of, number 1 after being arguably the best pitcher in baseball last year, that's why I have him number 4, because I'm projecting for 2024 for him to regress back to the mean a little bit. I don't think he'll have a 4 ERA, but it's probably going to be low to mid 3s, as opposed to some of the guys I have above him on this list. Who do you have for number 3?
At number 3, I do have Garrett Cole. So I mean, we're kind of on the same page there. The reason I didn't put him number 1 were a lot of the similar reasons that you just talked about, with his declining strikeout rate, declining whiff rate. But I'll use this to talk more about why he's number 3, and rather than why he's not 2 or 1. Because yeah, I mean, Garrett Cole was the Cy Young winner for a reason. He had a whip under 1 last year, and I think Garrett Cole has just been probably the best model for consistency that we've seen in baseball for a long time. He's outside, excluding 2020, he's had at least 5 F4 in every season other than 2021, which was just a year, or excuse me, 2022, which was just a year where he had some really tough home run luck. He had a 277 xFIP that year. So I mean, in the home run luck, it became a little more fair for him last year. I mean, maybe even a little bit more on the luckier side, but regardless, he was a guy that sort of went out there on a rotation where he was expected to do everything last year, and did it to the best of his ability. Even at age 32, he had excellent solid fastball velocity, even though he did lose a mile per hour on his fastball since last year. But his secondary pitches are all excellent. His slider had a 185 batting average against last year, and a 250 slugging. So that was really good for him. And that was one of the best pitches. 10 run value out of a secondary pitch is very hard to do. And he's done it for 4 straight years, full years on his slider. So, I mean, I still think it's one of the best secondary pitches in all of baseball. His curveball, his changeup, his cutter, obviously not used to any severe degrees, 12% or less, but all of them get the job done. Every single one of his pitches had a whiff rate above 22% last year, and every one of his secondary pitches had a whiff rate above 24%. Because naturally, if you throw the four seam fastball that much, the whiffs are kind of limited in most cases. But Garrett Cole still does a very good job of that. And I do have him as my number 3. I didn't put him at 2 or 1 because of the reasons you mentioned, but he's still a top 3 pitcher for you, a top 4 pitcher.
Yeah, absolutely. You're not going to have a 2.63. Well, sometimes you have a 2.63 ERA by accident, but you're not going to win Cy Young by accident. You're not going to have
not in 2023.
Not in 2023.
In like the 90s and early 2000s, yes, you are, but
yes,
not in 2023.
And you're not gonna lead in innings by accident, and have a still good peripheral numbers. I think it was a 3.48 expected ERA, very very good FIP as well. He's and still, despite the drop in strikeout rate and whiff rate, still very good strikeout to walk numbers. So obviously, I think you have to, when you're ranking the Cy Young winner number 4, you do have to explain a little bit of why you're putting him number 4 and not number 1 or 2. But definitely a top 5 pitcher. My number 3, I think some people also might say I'm underrating this guy as well, considering his strikeout and walk numbers, but I'm talking about Spencer Strider as my number 3. He is obviously the best strikeout pitcher in the game. He's likely going to lead in strikeout minus walk rate again this year. And what I'll say about his differences in ERA and expected ERA and ERA and FIP, I think that can be explained a lot by worse performance with runners in scoring position. His career strikeout rate with runners in scoring position is 33% as opposed to 38% in all of the situations. And he has a 10% barrel rate with runners in scoring position as opposed to a 6% with the bases empty, and a 3% home run rate with runners in scoring position as opposed to a 2% home run rate in all other situations. So what I'm trying to say there is, I think the differences between his ERA and his peripheral numbers are because of that timing thing that we talked about, which is, he'll have his walks and home runs, but a lot of them will happen in like the same inning. And that's a lot of the reason for his ERA and FIP differences. It's not necessarily batted ball luck. In fact, despite his discrepancy in ERA and FIP, as well as ERA and expected ERA, his difference in WOBA and expected WOBA over the last 2 years is only 1 point. So it's not batted ball data. It's a timing issue. And I think part of it has to do with him. He probably just pitches worse out of the stretch, which is why he pitches worse with runners in scoring position. So it's something interesting. However, that's just my analysis into the intricacies of it. Nonetheless, he's still probably going to be a ERA in the 3s type guy, still one of the best strikeout walk pitcher, or still the best strikeout walk pitcher in the game. And I'm also encouraged by his increase in innings production last year. He had 186 innings last year. So I still think he will have a lower ERA than he did last year. I just don't think it's going to be like as big of a difference as a lot of people think. What do you have for your number 2?
Yeah, I mean, we're just repeating ourselves at this point because I have Spencer Strider at my 2. I mean, he's the best strikeout to walk pitcher in the game, the best strikeout pitcher, certainly. I think it's really goes kind of under the radar how good he is at not walking people, though. I know 62nd percentile walk rate last year doesn't really stand out, but when you throw as hard as he does on a consistent basis, when you have a slider that moves as well as his slider does, it's not uncommon for guys to just not know where it's going, but he knows exactly where it's going, and he's able to locate, for the most part, pretty well. The stuff on it is obviously excellent. He's kind of the face of like Stuff Plus, all the Eno Saris numbers that are out there on Fangraphs. The reason I don't have a number 1 is because of some of the batted ball data. A 40% sweet spot rate last year is not something that I love. I mean, these guys do make on the rare occasion where guys make contact, they are pretty good at making the right kind of contact. But also, the exit velocity is like, all right. The barrel rate, guys do kind of get to him a little bit, but I mean, it's hard to ignore the strikeout rate that he put up last year, 36.7%, I believe, 36.8% last year. It's, and just in his, his second season entirely, it is something that's kind of absurd. And yeah, he's the number 2 pitcher in baseball, in my opinion.
Yeah, and to piggyback, excuse me, piggyback off of your point of the low walk rate, like the reason I think a lot of guys who strike out um, batters at the rate that Strider does have a higher walk rate than Strider does typically is because, yeah, like, he's not having, he's most of his, like, he's not getting as many like first pitch outs or second pitch outs as the other pitchers are, because he's, he has such great swing and miss stuff, and guys aren't making as much contact, obviously, so he's going to have longer plate appearances, which opens up for walks more. But obviously he's not, he hasn't had that high walk rate that would probably come with a higher strikeout rate like he does, especially, he's the best, he's far and away the best strikeout pitcher among starting pitchers in the game.
Yeah.
So my number 2 is probably your number 1. But my number 2 is Zach Wheeler. He's just been a real model of consistency. He is the second best FIP in baseball over the last 3 years, minimum 400 innings. But he also has like the expected numbers that backs up that FIP and makes it very legitimate. He has the third best expected WOBA against in the last 2 years, minimum 5,000 pitches thrown. And he's pitched more innings than the pitchers ahead of him in FIP and expected WOBA, like I mentioned. And just, yeah, he's extremely consistent peripherally. His ERA jumped a little bit, but some of that just had to do with poor timing and whatnot. He has been 80th percentile or better in expected ERA each of the last 3 years, and 88th percentile or better in average exit velocity each of the last 3 years. He's been top 10 in strikeout minus walk rate each of the last 3 years as well, minimum 150 innings pitched, and he's had 150 innings or more each of the last 3 years as well. So he's been consistently pretty healthy. He had a little bit of an IL stint in 2022, but nothing that held him out for too long. He has great strikeout minus walk, great strikeout and walk numbers each and every year, and also great like average exit velocity numbers each and every year, which you can't say about a lot of strikeout pitchers, but he has those, which is pretty rare combination. But he's just very, very consistent. And I feel I have no problem with him, or I have no problem believing that he'll be an elite pitcher once again this year.
Yeah, so for my number 1, I do indeed have Zach Wheeler. Yeah, another model of consistency, like you mentioned. The thing that really impresses me about him is that over the last 3 years, when he's really been like the true ace of the Phillies, the guy that they signed to that contract before the 2020 season, his batted ball profile against has gone through like every possible phase. In 2021, he had a 50% ground ball rate, a 16% fly ball rate, 24% line drive rate. His line drive rate I'm actually going to ignore because it's been pretty similar throughout the years. And he finished second in Cy Young. A lot of people think he should have won that Cy Young. And they gave it to Corbin Burns, who had a lot less innings pitched, but a generational FIP season, as I always like to say. In 2022, he was, just as good, but with a 46% ground ball rate, it went down by 4.5%. A 23.5% fly ball rate, it went up by 7%. Guess what? Still an excellent pitcher. And then in 2023, a 41% ground ball rate, below the league average, going from 50% to 41% within 2 years. A 26% fly ball rate. His fly ball rate went up almost 10% between the 2 years. His pop-up rate went from 5.5% in 2022 to 9.1% in 2023. And if it wasn't for his batting average on balls in play against with runners in scoring position, I think he would have won the Cy Young last year. He threw 192 innings. He had 212 strikeouts. a 5% walk rate, 5.1% barrel rate. There's just not, again, there's not a single place where he doesn't excel. And you can even point to his ground ball rate as a place where he doesn't excel. But guess what? He's been there, done that. He's already succeeded with a high ground ball rate. Now he's doing it with a low ground ball rate. It's the kind of guy where you don't really have to worry about what his ground ball rate, what his batted ball profile looks like, because he's going to succeed no matter where everyone's hitting at. And this is also with the Phillies defense behind him. So, that kind of plays into the role of like, hey, no matter where they're, he's getting the guys out, he's getting the innings in, no matter how they're hitting the ball. And he's not giving up home runs at a high rate, even with a high fly ball rate, which is terrific because those are the easiest kinds of outs to get. It was a very tough process of finding this list. There's a lot of guys who could make a case for it, number one. But I put Zach Wheeler at one. I feel pretty good about it. I think he's the best pitcher in baseball going into 2024. Now I want to hear this hot take.
Yeah, this is yeah, especially considering like, okay, I have Wheeler, Cole, and Strider like 2, 3, and 4.
Before is it? I feel like I have two guesses.
Okay.
All right. Was this person on my list?
Yes.
I know exactly who it is.
Okay. So
Yeah.
we talk about consistency. He isn't on the health front, or at least last year he was not he wasn't consistently on the mound, but I don't think it's gonna linger, and I think he's gonna put together a full season. But like this guy's been really, really consistent and kind of been sneaking under people's radars. But the best pitcher for 2024 for me is Max Fried. Out of 74 pitchers with 400 plus innings since the start of 2020, Fried's ERA ranks first and FIP ranks fourth. His ERA has never eclipsed 3.04 in these 4 years, and his FIP has never been over 3.31. Out of 58 pitchers with 1,250 plus batted balls since the start of 2020, he is the lowest average exit velocity and barrel rate, and the second lowest expected slugging and slugging against, behind Corbin Burns, who has not been as effective as recently. And Max Fried also has the 5th highest ground ball rate on that list of 58. So along with soft contact, he's also getting good contact with his high ground ball rate. With runners in scoring position since 2020, Max Fried has a 57% ground ball rate and 83.5 average exit velocity. That leads to him having a 181 average against and 194 expected batting average against with runners in scoring position in this span, and a 237 slugging against and 261 expected slugging against with runners in scoring position. And out of 91 pitchers with 1,250 plus pitches with runners in scoring position since 2020, Fried has the lowest slugging and expected slugging with runners in scoring position, which partially explains those ERA and expected ERA differences and ERA and FIP differences. It's not really a matter of batted ball luck. His BABIP his overall BABIP against has been fairly average. In the last 2 years, out of 74 pitchers with 250 plus innings pitched, Max Fried is the only pitcher with an ERA and FIP both in the top 3. And also in 2023, he was 91st percentile in average exit velocity and 97th percentile in expected ERA and barrel rate. So he's been an elite pitcher. I think his injury last year, made people sort of so it made people forget about him a little bit because he wasn't obviously in any Cy Young conversations, but when he came back and was healthy, he was still an amazing pitcher, and he was as amazing a pitcher as he had been the previous 3 years. And he just has a long track record of success. He's heading into his age 30 season, I think. So it's not like he's
going into free agency too.
Yeah, heading into a contract year, and just has been really, really good for a while. And if he's staying on the mound, which there's no reason to really suggest that he isn't going to, I think there's a reason why we both picked him Cy Young last year. Like he's one of the best pitchers in the game. So yeah, that's my hot take. That's what no one else is saying. Is Max?
No one else is saying it. Yeah, I mean, it's probably an accomplishment that I even had him top 10.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah, look, I mean, you and I both picked him to win NL Cy Young last year, and obviously the reason he didn't win it was because he got injured, and he got injured very quickly. But his performance didn't give us any reason to deviate from why we picked him to be the Cy Young. I mean, for me, like there are so many good starting pitchers out there to where it's very easy to kind of let go of people that didn't pitch a lot last year. I thought, just putting him in top 10 was service to being like, hey, just remember this guy's still out there. He did only pitch 77 innings last year, but it's hard to find a pitcher that you would take their 77 innings over his 77 innings, because if you covered up all his numbers outside of innings pitched last year, you'd say, yeah, that's Cy Young quality work right there.
Right,
And
right.
obviously innings pitched do matter, but he was kept off the field unfortunately. But his performance gave every reason to believe that he's still an elite pitcher.
Yeah, exactly. Like and it's something where I'm not like, obviously I think he sneaks under the radar, but I couldn't even really get too mad at like MLB Network for having him 9 or
No,
having him 10, because initially I was like, wow, they're putting this guy ahead, but I was like, oh yeah, I could definitely see a case for Logan Webb above him, or Kevin Gausman, or Zach Gallen above him. I could see a
even
case.
Yamamoto.
I could see a case for Yamamoto, and then obviously Strider, Cole, and Wheeler. I could definitely see a case for having them above him. But I think something that like doesn't get accounted for with the FIP and expected ERA numbers are his elite approach with runners in scoring position. He just seems to allow way softer contact and just does way better when the pressure's on, and that's over a 4-year span. It's not necessarily a small sample, and that's why he has, since 2020, out of pitchers with 400 plus innings since then, he has the best ERA. And that could very well continue as we if he has a full year in 2024. So yeah, it's something I'm excited about. I'm excited about his free agency when that comes up. I'm sure that that Braves deal, when he does get that Braves extension, that 4-year, $30 million extension will be very
With
nice.
1% going to the Atlanta Braves Foundation.
Yeah, yes, very much so. So yeah, that does it for starting pitchers. I
Yeah.
guess
By the way,